Yeah.
Okay, I'm crying. That music's beautiful.
That was gorgeous music. Who made that? I felt like I was going to get a massage.
It felt like we were at a Sigur Rós concert. I'm like, take me to Iceland.
I was like, are we meditating?
Welcome. We are AsapSCIENCE. I'm Mitch.
And I'm Greg.
And today, I'm just trying to make sure we're not going to cut off here. We're going to talk about creating content, especially when it comes to content that can relate to your audience, but sometimes some things are not so sexy or trendy. And so we thought it would be interesting to talk through our process of how you make people care about things or engage with things that you're passionate with that aren't always immediately so accessible.
Yeah, essentially, we're going to teach you how to use science to hijack people's brains.
Yeah,
which is what we do.
That's the devious way of saying it, but it's true.
So our mantra at AsapSCIENCE is that we try to make science make sense. And Mitch and I are both science communicators. That's what our job is now. But we met in university in our biological science degrees. Together, we are a partner, we are dating, we are in
partners
love.
In life, partners in
business. That's a whole other little session that we can talk about that. But the whole idea that we realized was we loved science so deeply, but we had these other interests. I had a minor in visual art. I did not paint this painting behind me, but it is gorgeous. Mitch also knew a lot about editing, and it was sort of this like
You also had a teaching degree. It's like he's the more educated.
Yeah, exactly. I became a science teacher. But it was just this mending of science and art and this ability to sort of relate with a lot of different people. Our friends are all queer. They're all into art. They don't really care about science. And we were constantly trying to get them obsessed with science. And it's sort of that intersection that allowed us to start to understand, like, wait, we want to figure out how we can get people interested in something that a lot of people feel like isn't for them.
Yeah. So for those wondering, I'm not sure how many people necessarily know who we are, but ultimately we took that from our university times and being around people who we'd be like, we can teach you why you're drunk. We can teach you why you're hungover or how much coffee you need or why it's affecting you. And ultimately we turned that into a YouTube channel thinking, hey, this is a really clever way to engage with people who don't necessarily think science is for them or think it's too hard or had a bad experience and show them that science is everywhere.
So now we've been doing this for 10 years as our job, our full-time job. And we have a YouTube channel with about 10 million subscribers. But now we also do a lot of education on other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, things like that. So we are sort of using our skills as science communicators to try and just educate the masses about science, but using social media.
So today, we're going to go through some of our tips and tricks, but honestly, if you have questions, ask them now. We're happy to answer them throughout the presentation if they're relevant to what we're saying, but also at the end, we'll have some time for Q&A and just kind of like get into our brain of like what we think about when we're creating content, especially content that is like more complicated or is sometimes controversial. And that's something that we've always been sort of not afraid to tackle.
Yeah, we don't shy away from controversy. So we got some demonetized videos.
Classic. So I guess we'll start with just some examples of some cool little illusions for your brain.
And this is how we trick people.
Yeah, this is how we trick people. So if you take a look at this little video, you'll see that in the background, we have a gradient from left to right as black to white. And then the little square in the middle or the rectangle is also a gradient in the opposite direction. And the more you look at it, you'll just be like, yes, that is what is on the screen.
It's an ombre.
It's an ombre, a grayscale ombre, as it were. But if we actually switch over and remove the background, let's see if it'll work. Is the slide working? We're going to remove the background. You can probably guess what's happening. Okay. Of course, it's not going to change. Let's see if this one will work. There, this one's going to work. So you remove the background, the gradient is gone. That up front rectangle has always been a solid color, but your brain, even when the gradient comes back behind, cannot unsee it. So there's certain types of ways that you can think about the human psyche, the way that we perceive the world. So much of it is out of our control. And we like to use these illusions as examples of ways that you can think about, you can not impress people, but impress opinions upon people and make them learn and make them engage. So in this example, you can show somebody this and they immediately have an experience and they start to realize, okay, I want to pay attention. Why is this happening to my brain?
And it's also like your brain is like you're not in control of your brain in the same way that you might think. Like it always freaks me out.
So what have we got next? Okay, wow, this. Okay, here's another little fun trick. So I want you to close your left eye and with your open right eye, stare at the plus symbol and then move your face forward and backwards.
This is crazy. You're like, okay.
And there will be
There
a
it
point at which you can no longer see that black circle. And so this is actually your literal blind spot.
So this has less to do with your brain's perception of things and more to do with a physiological malfunction of your body. So essentially, what happens is the rods and cones at the back of your eye, which are represented here in green, that is where you're actually creating pictures for your brains to understand. But the specific neuron, the optic nerve that goes to take all that information to your brain, interrupts your rods and cones. So what your brain does is it just fills in that spot whenever you're looking around anywhere. It goes, oh, okay, so there's a little bit of green over here. There's a tree over here. So we're just going to fill it in with some green. But that illusion shows you can actually see where that nerve is and where that malfunction is. And there are other animals like an octopus, for example, who actually in many ways has a more evolved eye. If you think
it does not have this problem.
Doesn't have the problem.
Its
an
optic
octopus
nerve is actually behind.
Yeah, and an octopus has been essentially evolved and on this planet longer than us, like measly mammals. So it's a really interesting thing. And we've actually done a video called The Perfectly Evolved Human, where we talk about, how are our bodies kind of messed up? And like how with evolution going forward, could they be better? And that's kind of a catchy title, but in that video, we essentially just want to teach you about the physiology of your eye.
See, bam, you're learning about biology because you were captured by a cool phenomenon.
And also these physical experiences, we do them on YouTube sometimes. And that's something to think about. If you're ever trying to communicate with people, if there's something you can physically make them feel, like even an illusion and like an ad or something like that, it's meaningful because it's like you're actually playing with someone's perception of the world.
Totally. I think the moment you can capture someone in a thing that they can experience. At the end of the day, we all think about ourselves. We all only care about ourselves. You've often hear that phrase where it's like, stop worrying what other people think because they're not thinking about you. But in the moment, if you can give somebody something that they can literally experience or feel or change the way they think, that's why great art is great, because it ultimately changes the way that people perceive or think. Same kind of thing. This optical illusion has, I think, a lot of little circles, but you can only see one or two at a time. If you move your eyes, they'll suddenly reveal. And hopefully it might be really small on the screen. You might have to blow your screen up, but I'm actually going to skip this one just in case it's too small.
but it's just your brain. Yeah,
it's your brain filling in information in a way that it's just making those same predictions. And it's like, it's too busy. It's too much information. I'm going to make the best guess I can.
And your brain's doing this all the time because it's a very powerful organ. And if it allowed all the perceptions in, you'd be exhausted, even more exhausted than you already are.
You might remember the classic dress.
This is one of our most viral videos because we explained the science behind this. And because we love explaining illusions so much, when this thing happened, we were like, oh my gosh, it's time for us. Demi Lovato's tweeting about the dress. We got to get on it.
Honestly, that is something we think about a lot. Obviously, a lot of our content comes from what we care about and what we're constantly wanting to share. But there's this other element of how do you capture the moments that, it's not every day that the whole world is talking about a scientific phenomenon.
And whenever that happens, you bet we're dropping our pens and our phones and we are working on a video.
Exactly.
So sometimes those things are out of your control, but something to think about always when you're trying to communicate with people, especially about something that's like science.
Okay, last illusion before we get into more in-depth conversations around how we.
But this one's crazy.
This is gonna blow your mind.
This isn't even necessarily an illusion. Okay.
If you are with somebody else and talk to them about this, it's gonna blow their mind.
So this is for English speakers because there's actually two ways that we perceive time. So the question is, if Wednesday's noon meeting has been moved forward by 2 hours, what time is the meeting now at? And so I personally think if the meetings move forward, it's at 2 p.m.
Whereas I would say it's at 10 a.m. You moved it forward.
So this is one of our most recent videos that went viral where it's like, wait, I genuinely read this study about the perception of time in the human language. It's a linguistic thing.
And I just want to clarify, it's around 50-50 split. So we asked like tens of thousands of people voted on this and it was 50-50.
Ask this question at the dinner table with your family and it will be very fascinating. So I was like, this is kind of boring. It's obviously 2 p.m. I bring it up with Mitch. He's like, it's 10 a.m. And then we're like, wait, what? And what it actually means is there are two ways that we perceive time as English speakers. So I'm going to start with the ego moving perspective because that's me and it's on the right and it's 2 p.m. You think that you are moving forward through time. So I personally think that, August is my favorite time of summer. I'm getting closer to August. I am moving forward through time. Whereas the time moving perspective, which Mitch has, where you think it's 10 a.m., you think that you are stagnant and time is moving through you, kind of like if you're standing in a stream and the water's flowing through you. So you think August is coming towards you.
Yeah, which is why forward to me means that it's actually coming closer, which is like moving towards 10.
Whereas I think forward means moving forward, which is moving to 2 p.m. There's fascinating studies about this, including if you get off an airplane, you're more likely to think of the ego moving perspective in 2 p.m.
Because
you've just viscerally moved through space. There are other ways that this has changed. And this is an English language thing. There's some indigenous cultures that actually think of forward as behind them and backwards as in front of them. It's just a fascinating thing. And also because of YouTube and this viral video, we were able to understand from other languages how this actually doesn't even make sense to them. So I freaking love this. I ask people this question all the time, and it's just a great way to have a conversation about fascinating things.
So on that note, let's talk a little bit about how we actually create and craft our videos and what we think about. So from the get-go, what we learned was, how do you really think about that moment when someone comes across your content? So that can be on any platform. Ultimately, we think so deeply about putting ourselves in the minds of a random person. Of course, it's perfect and great and amazing to think about our current watchers, like we've already captured their imagination.
Or the people who love science and subscribe to us to learn anything about science.
But there's this element of what if you're starting from scratch, how do you make somebody stop and think about your stuff? And so that's very platform dependent. Obviously on YouTube, thumbnail and title are kind of your intro. And so if you can't capture someone's imagination on that, it also is time signature, so how long the video is. You're thinking of all these elements and balancing them out. If somebody was given this content, would they click it? And so for us, it really is trying to balance all those elements. And for me, it's like, what is the most interesting angle? One of our old videos we give as an example a lot is, we think vitamin D is so cool. It's so important. It does so many fascinating things on your body.
And you literally get it from the sun hitting your skin, which creates catechol.
You can eat it, but hardly. Those pills don't really do much. You need the sunlight to hit your skin to trigger the reaction, which gives you your vitamin D, which is why a lot of people in extreme hemispheres are vitamin D deficient in the winters. But ultimately, we decided to call that video, "What Would Happen If You Stopped Going Outside?" Something that's way more relatable, doesn't seem overly sciencey, because you don't want to scare people away. Once people are hooked and now they need to know an answer, there's a really interesting cross section of where you find that moment where you can capture someone's imagination with themselves. Remember, it's always thinking, how does this relate to the person? And then you can sprinkle in the things that you care about.
I was going to call it the sunshine vitamin, which would not have done nearly as well. What if you stopped going outside? It went very viral because everyone wants to be like, wait, what would happen if you stopped going outside?
Now, a more recent video that Greg actually led was very popular.
So penises are shrinking. This is a really fascinating way that I was able to talk about the plastic problem and microplastics. So when I started to understand a lot more about our issue with plastic seeping into essentially our atmosphere and all of our water and our products, there's this really fascinating information about how the chemicals can cause hormone dysregulation in specific contexts. And therefore, there are really great studies about how in the future this could cause a decrease in taint size, which is literally between the anus and the ball sack for men. So it's actually just for men. So this is like two very specific studies. They're very meaningful, but I was able to talk about all different aspects of the plastic problem, all different aspects of infertility. But of course, we call it penises are shrinking. We say, your penis is shrinking. People click, and by the end of the episode, they've learned so much and they're satisfied. And it is actually true that in the future, men's penises will be smaller.
And they have been shrinking.
And they have been shrinking. You know what I mean? So it's like, obviously you have to lead with a certain thing, but we're always trying to figure out how to make these complex subjects be a part of our videos, these biological pathways that we deeply care about to be a part of our videos.
And I mean, this goes across all platforms. Again, every platform you have to think a little differently. So say you're on a short form platform like TikTok. obviously those initial moments, how you capture someone is not necessarily a title and a thumbnail, but is those first words you say. And I know this stuff has been said a lot, and especially told to like advertisers, that you need to really, even on YouTube ads, they're like, make sure your first 5 seconds are really captivating. There's nothing more true than that. And we can see it with the content we make. We think mostly about that. If I have an idea I want to execute on, most of my planning is around how to present those initial bits and how to like sort of hook people. And then you can build out the rest of that episode.
It's honestly insane how much time we spend on this thumbnail, how much time we spend on the first 30 seconds, depending on the thing. If it's an Instagram reel, the first 5 seconds, that's our main energy is going towards that. And then all the complexity comes after that. And then this leads to the question, how do you communicate complexity in an effective manner so not to lose the intricacies, but at the same time not overwhelm? That's a great question, especially as science communicators. And we recently did a video about the science of less, which is about editing. It's about subtracting things. A lot of the time we like to solve things by adding things. And one thing that
this is like a human phenomenon. It was at the front page of Nature. They realized in this study that it's a natural heuristic that humans use to solve problems. The instinct is to add things.
Yes. And one thing that we have realized as science communicators is you need to edit, you need to subtract. You need to look at complex words and think, does this need to be a word, or could this be represented as a symbol? Does this enzyme that fits into a substrate, could this be better represented visually while we use like language that is much easier? So we are lucky in the sense that we use animations in our video. I draw them, Mitch edits them. So there are a lot of times in science videos where we have to cut to an animation, and that is a very effective way to educate people. And I encourage everyone to think about that. Wait, could we animate what we're doing in order for people to understand? But I really think it's about editing when it comes to complexity, and really sort of like deciding what hill you want to die on. And we argue about this a lot. I'm really into biological pathways. I'm a science teacher. I usually am fighting for like the complexity to be there. Whereas Mitch is more about like, no, we have to think about the person who's going to turn this off if they're scared. So if you can find people on your team who kind of have the yin and yang of that is where you can hit that sweet spot. But with science, we're always thinking about this.
I'd say, to just further answer that, it also, you should decide who you want your audience to be. And so for us, a lot of our initial interest was our friends who weren't engaged in science and thought it was too complex or too hard or too scary or hated their science teacher or all these different things. But there are definitely channels and people and science communicators out there who are much more interested in mostly speaking to scientists. And in that case, you wouldn't want to sacrifice complexity because your audience might actually be there for that. So I think it's defining your goals, because that will matter a lot in terms of not managing your audience, but growing your audience.
Now you're hearing his arguments for when he tells me that I am being too complicated. He's like, well, we have to reach more people. And you're right. It's
a fine balance for us, because we want to reach people who don't necessarily think science is for them, but then we also want them to feel like they're getting deep enough learning. So it is a constant balance. And sometimes we don't land on it. Sometimes we're too simple. Sometimes we're too complex. But I think if that's a question you're asking yourself, the first place to go to is, who's my audience, and stay consistent. Because that's how you build audience, is by showing, hey, here's the kind of thing I make. Don't worry, I'm not also going to make this and also going to make this and also going to make this unless I have them in different places. But if you come here, if you follow me or subscribe to me here, I will roughly give you this circle of content.
Yeah.
And that can be frustrating at times, because there's moments when we feel restricted by our own
like, I just want to paint
boundaries.
the painting and film it. It's like, it's not going to work.
We do that, it flops, and then we're sad. But I think it is important to know that that's how anyone would react. If I follow or subscribe to someone and they make totally different content, it's not even always that I think it's awful. It's just, I didn't plan to watch that.
Consistency is key.
Okay, moving into our next section, before we get into misinformation, I just wanted to slow down and try and think about if there's any other moments in our creation process.
We can always go back to this slide. It's great.
This is our shrinking. I think there's also the learning process. I don't know how many people are creators in this audience or want to be. A huge part of the internet creation is just do it. Nike got it right. That's what they say. And you just put it out and you learn from it. And the more precious you are of something, I just like the idea of it just being a quantity game. Obviously quality matters, but there is a world where you hold on to something for too long and you realize actually people weren't engaged with that. It didn't have what was going to capture people's imagination.
And I think it can be a quantity game until you figure out what works and then follow that quality. So for us, like, we just started doing animated videos. We didn't even know what we were doing. And then all of a sudden we found that it was these questions that had to do with our own bodies and people's own bodies that really stuck with people. And then we were able to now confidently educate, oh, wait, you have to, play with illusions, give people an experience, explain perceptions of people's actual lives in order to educate. But I don't think we would have ever been able to understand that if we hadn't made a bunch of content off the top and figured out what landed.
And even just to further on that complexity answer, I wanted to say, for me, it is really deciding what is essential. Like, if you want people to learn, and I see that there's some questions about, vaccines or other scary things, not scary things, but some people are very scared of them or uncertain. It's just making sure that they understand and don't feel overwhelmed, or even if it's on a simple, fun idea, you just want to make sure, okay, I think this biochemical pathway is really interesting, but I have gone to school for biochemistry. Is it necessary to the main message? One thing I think that happens in videos a lot is an over complication. And that goes back to that addition problem. Sometimes a video just needs to be, or a video or a blog or content just needs to be about one thing. And that allows it to live as that one thing and follow a narrative where you aren't bouncing all around. That's not to say, again, that you can't make content that kind of has that flow and that room to play. But for us, it was, let's strip it down to what is actually necessary. And hopefully we find another place to plug in this. We make podcasts and stuff now. So that's a space where we can just talk way more in depth and rant and, go all over the place. Whereas with our kind of
AsapSCIENCE.
AsapSCIENCE, it's like
as simple as
make
possible.
this simple and shareable. So a couple more little fun things we'll share with you. I wanted to bring up misinformation because, we are living in the age of misinformation. And I think if there are creators out there, it's kind of not our responsibility, but we are also appreciative of people who put the time and effort into creating content that is actually factually educating people. And so first we have a couple little illusions. If you see
who's the oldest in this photo, folks?
Hopefully this isn't rude, but place your bets on A, B, or C. And, I might have, given some hints with the misinformation part, but actually they're all the same age. They're not an age. These are all AI generated images. So none of these people actually ever existed. Second little illusion.
This one I find quite easy, but
which painting was created by a robot?
So I just like to go out and say it's painting A because I really do think that, I'm like the robot, whatever, this robot ain't that good. You know what I mean? That's a little bit of a busted painting.
Yeah, but there are, paintings like that. I mean, you can see.
I could argue that painting A is more artistic. It's more avant-garde. It's painting outside the boxes, which is kind of scary because it is a robot. And it's signed in the bottom right with the algorithm that built it. So this is where we're getting. And then which one is not real? It's actually the image on the left
of apples
is fake. It's the same image on the right, but run through a program looking at a bunch of apples and trying to essentially, this is like any coder in here will be like, what the hell? It's not that simple. But essentially it's run through an AI program that's trying to trick something into thinking it's apples until eventually it lands on this photo where this convincingly would let someone think it's an apple, but really it's just a picture of oranges with the colors changed, as you can see. So in many ways, we are up against AI. We are up against misinformation now in complex ways that we never honestly could have imagined even 10 years ago when we started making videos online. And there are channels that
are fully just like people that you are not them.
We made deep fakes of YouTubers and they're pretty good. And we just made them ourselves.
In 24 hours.
Yeah. That's a video. You can go watch that. Subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And I would say with regards to misinformation, even outside of AI, we live in an age, or I guess it always has been this way, that misinformation is really cheap to produce. Whereas quality, accurate content or news takes time, takes research, it takes money. Scientists literally have to go, okay, we actually need to find out if masks work. Now we're going to spend months and months actually finding the answer to this. But in that meantime, people on the internet can say anything. So for anyone out there, wanting to create content or working to put things out in the world that are, engaging with others, I have all the respect for you, because it is there are times when it's just overwhelming to see what's out there.
And also with science, the answer is usually very nuanced. It's not always the sexiest answer. In fact, we've made videos with other companies where they've been like, well, actually, like that ending is a little bit like lackluster. Could we change it? And we're like, no, it's the truth. It's this, or not the truth. It's the most accurate scientific research that we have. So it's such a challenge in our day-to-day life because we're up against people just saying whatever they want. And with the pandemic and with the vaccine, which we're getting to, I really feel like we've had a hard year because there's people who can say what they want, make up anything. It can be really captivating, really emotional, but we're kind of trying to come in with the science, which is always very nuanced, can be very boring. I'm constantly reading articles that are like making my eyes go cross-eyed because they're so boring, but they're leading us to what is the closest thing we can get to in a global pandemic. So it's definitely a challenge. And I think it's something that we all need to be thinking about as we make content online and hopefully try our best to make something that's meaningful and truthful and not contribute to the massive misinformation that we have.
To round out this session, and this may actually answer some of the questions I've been seeing in the chat, is to talk about how to actually change people's opinions. And not in a devious way, but people come with their beliefs, especially if you're just trying to make people interested and engage with your passion and the things you want to talk about. What are important things to think about? And these are things that we think about this all the time in every video, particularly in videos that we feel are important. We have a handful of videos talking about COVID in the last year, about vaccines. And so these kind of things always run in our mind. This is This is
so depressing.
There's a lot of research that effectively sums up to the fact that facts do not convince people.
And we're going to explain why.
So basically, there was this amazing study that had two different groups. So you had climate change believers and climate change deniers. And in the first group at the top, they were told that climate change is going to be worse than before. And in the bottom group, they were told, you know what, it's going to be better. It's not as bad as we thought. Now, when that happened, climate change deniers who were told it would be worse just ignored that fact. Whereas climate change deniers who were told it wouldn't be so bad were like, amazing. I knew it, told you.
Amazing. They
took that fact and it influenced and supported their opinion, and it made their opinion more strong.
Yeah.
Now, the thing you might not have thought is that the exact same thing happens to climate change believers. When they think that it's going to be not as bad, or they're told that research has shown that it won't be as bad, they kind of ignore that information. But when they're told it's actually going to be way worse than before, they double down and start to become even more polarized in their opinion. And so
this is hard for us because obviously as science communicators, we understand that climate change is real. And it's like, it's hard for us to not go in with this like audacity and be like, like 98% of scientists like agree. But it's like, these are the types of studies that we need to be thinking about when we try and decide how we are actually going to be convincing people.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's important to know that facts can just end up polarizing people, particularly on polarized issues to begin with.
And then this is just a diagram, image we drew to explain that we live in an interesting world where a lot of people are experts. Like, we are experts in science communication, but we don't know a lot about a lot of things. But through the internet, we have access to so many smart people, and by proxy, think we know more than we do. Everyone thinks they know more than they do, especially because of the internet. And this leads to something called the illusion of explanatory depth. And this is a funny thing to do. We actually thought about a video where we just go up to people and we say, do you know how a zipper works? And they go like, yeah, for sure. And then if you ask them to explain how a zipper works, like, they'll fumble their words. How does a toilet work? They'll fumble their words. How does a computer work? They'll fumble their words, because we're relying on these intelligent, beautiful Homo sapiens who have designed these things, who know so much about each of these things. We use them all the time, but when we're actually questioned on them, we always end up back at this place where we maybe don't know as much as we thought. So we're just always constantly trying to think about this as we go forth, trying to explain vaccines and climate change and these things that we care so deeply about, and know that they are polarizing people.
So, sorry. This ends with sort of a really important thing. If you're talking to someone, say it's about vaccines, say it's about COVID, because those are obviously, in this day and age, somehow political issues. But a lot of what people do is they look to who's my in group and who's my out group. And they're much more likely to trust people who are on the inside. So a really strategic way to talk to somebody is think about, how can I be on their in group? If they already see me because of this opinion we're about to talk about as somebody who sees it as other, where do we come together? And so when you think about the fear of vaccines, for instance, and say it's to do with autism, because some people, prop up that old study that's been refuted and debunked or whatever. To get into that, but they will use that. But a better place to start is actually to think like, okay, we both want to protect our children. And then to talk about, you don't even need to talk about vaccines. Studies have shown when you show that you both care about children, suddenly you're on the in-group. You both have the same goal, and maybe you have different ideas of how to effectively get that done, but that can open you into somebody else's world.
Like for us, we'd be reiterating studies about what happens to kids in the communities who don't get vaccinated against measles and how more kids are likely to die of measles. We'll focus on those studies.
And you don't even need to talk about the vaccines. You just talk about the effects of measles.
And other things that we'll do before we get to the Q&A is if we want to talk to people who are not climate change deniers, we want to actually talk to people who obviously understand and have a understanding of the consensus about climate change. At the beginning of the video, we'll say, this is for you. This is to teach you how to talk to climate change deniers, instead of saying, this is a video for climate change deniers. So we'll actually, at the beginning of our video, say, this is for people who understand that climate change is real. Here are 5 ways that you can talk to climate change deniers. And then we'll have another video that goes, this is us talking to climate change deniers. And as for the vaccine, recently we made a video called The Truth About Vaccines, where we talk about this crazy thing going on the internet saying that your arm's going to become magnetized. And what we actually do is we use the fear of needles. I'm scared of needles. So I was able to enter by saying, I'm actually really scared of needles. I get nervous when I go to get a vaccine, and it's 10% of people aren't going to get the vaccine just because they're afraid of needles. So we make this video that's all about like magnetism. It's funny. We're showing TikToks. I'm being vulnerable about how I'm scared of needles, but really we're just laying out the science as to why these vaccines are safe, as to why being afraid of needles actually is like a very normal thing, because we are not evolved to have metal go in our arms and not think that's not a bad thing. And those are the types of ways that we're constantly trying to make a positive change on this planet, because then we're going to die and we just hope on our deathbed we feel like we had a good life.
Ultimately, these are triangles versus circles, but at the end of the day, they're all just cool shapes.
Yes, happy Pride.
So we have a couple of questions here. If you have any more, send them now. We've got maybe a little bit to answer some of them. I see one here. Do you ever feel tempted to create other YouTube channels focused on other topics? How do you stay focused?
I personally find science to be almost spiritual. That sounds weird, but I love science so much throughout my whole life. It's how I've coped with any sort of sadness. It's how I've coped with any sort of happiness. So I look at everything with a scientific lens that I've never really become bored. Everything in the whole world comes back to science for me. And I've not really had those moments. I constantly try and think about how I can bring science into the things I care about, like pop culture or essentially this pandemic, because it's like all of the things that we're going to have. But I've never really had that. But I feel like you sometimes, you have a lot more interest in it than I do.
Well, I think it's also, I wouldn't say I have more interest, like you're interested in art. And I think it's really important to engage those other things. I think there's I don't know the stats, so don't quote me on this, but a lot of Nobel laureates actually are typically musicians or artists, and they don't only focus on their scientific endeavor. And that doesn't mean you have to make another YouTube channel about it unless you want to. So there have been times we used to vlog our travels. We had a second channel for that. Even on TikTok now, we started playing around with being just more personalities, having fun and showing people more into who we are so that they can engage with us and share, our interest in art, our interest in music, and our interest in production and those things.
So but I also think the science aspect, we've now been doing YouTube for 10 years, and we've seen a lot of people come and go in the entertainment industry. And the fact that we're educating people on science, I think, is the only reason we're still going, because there's constantly things happening. Again, a global pandemic. It was we never could make a video about a virus and anyone would care. Then last March, make a video about a virus has millions of views.
Wants to know.
Science is evergreen. Science never goes out of style. It's something that we've said. And so I think actually at this point, it's going to be up to us when we end this. Whereas there was a time where we thought, eventually we're going to have to end this. Oh my God. How do you deal with mean comments / criticism? Wow. We have very different approaches.
Yeah, I'd say I think anyone who uses the internet and social media knows how complicated and difficult this can be. I think we're lucky that we do have 2 of us. So there's been it's a little easier to bounce it off of each other and double check, I'm not crazy. I didn't do something wrong. I mean, we get a lot of homophobic comments, and I think having each other made it easy to sort of say, these people are crazy. We just need to ignore it.
But it hurts. It hurts. And I think that there's a part of it where you have to own the fact that it hurts, and then you have to, communicate about it. But I personally am a more like, what's the word? I feel like I'm like
resilient.
The thing that comes to mind is like I stomp around life, and I'm very
you got a thicker skin.
I honestly think it's like my obsession with science. It's like I think about things from a very macro level. I zoom out to the universe. I think about how I'm so lucky to be alive, but it could all be very meaningless. Like if it is the big crunch or heat death, which is how the universe ends. I think I find a lot of the comments, especially the homophobic ones, that they don't mean anything to me, because I'm just like, these are people from all over the world, from different walks of life. And I'm very confident and like love myself. And so I'm very lucky for that. And I think you also have that, but I think sometimes it's just like, it can hit you on a bad day, and it can be really awful to be honest.
It's not the best, but we do a pretty good job of, we post a video or a piece of content online. At the beginning, we usually check the comments, because it's a question of, is there a glaring
error? Did we spell something wrong?
Yeah, or is there some major issue, or is even there a glitch in this video?
And they're like, dude, what? Gays can't do science. Then we like ignore those.
But after that, we tend to sort of check out. I mean...
Yeah, no, it's true. I notice other creators who really do focus on the comments, and I'd say in general, when we meet other creators, we're aware that we are not looking at the comments and taking them in the way that other people are. I think
ultimately, I can take my own advice here as well, but it is just, if it's not adding anything to help you make your content better, like, you really shouldn't be taking criticism except from people that you look up to and that you would want it from. And that's something I have to remind myself of. Like, if there's somebody in a field that I appreciate and I value their criticism, first of all, it probably will be with a tone of empathy and compassion. And second of all, like, that's the only person's criticism I would like to listen to. If Greg criticizes me, that's different. I want your opinion to help me.
Oh, I was like, you don't listen to me. No, like, and you can tell the difference between a mean comment and constructive criticism. And we've taken videos down. We made a video about skincare, debunking skincare, where we talked about how anti-aging meant wrinkles, which is actually a very white Eurocentric thing. There's a lot of other people who aren't white who aging actually has nothing to do with wrinkles. And so when we realized that, wait, we've made a whole video just assuming that aging and wrinkles are the same thing, because that's what we've been told. And then, we changed that. We made a completely different video about that. So we really like to be open about criticism,
constructive criticism,
and science, and being like, science is evolving. We have older videos that we take down, that we update, because science is something that constantly changes. And we actually really like that. So we like to be open to criticism. And you can very easily tell the difference between a mean comment about how we're gay and that, like, my voice is so gay.
The internet is mean, and you just, if you're going to make online content, that is a sad part of it. And there's a time when you just have to decide if it's worth it or not. If you're able to ignore it and live happily, but if it destroys you too much, I think that's when you decide, this is just not right.
And it's a sign that you're saying something. So a lot of our videos that we care deeply about, and you can go on our channel and see some very controversial things that we think deeply about. We are, in many cases, we believe in a Green New Deal. We're radical. We're queer. We have strong opinions for what we want the future to be. And we don't shy away from that. A lot of our peers have those opinions, but they would never put it on the internet. But when you do, you get a lot more comments, you get a lot more people engaging. And in many ways, it's a sign that you're saying something meaningful when you're getting a little bit of blowback and criticism and things like that. So there's also another way where you can navigate it. If you make a very vanilla video, yeah, sure, you'll get lots of views. You'll get a bounty ad or something like that. But like, you're not necessarily going to get the comments and the sort of passion that we get from a lot of the people who've been following us for a long time, who understand who we are, what we're trying to do. And they meet us in the street and they're like, literally, thank you so much for what you're doing. As opposed to just entertaining me, you've maybe like helped me understand and feel seen about the world that is really complicated.
At the end of the day, only mediocrity escapes criticism. as they say.
Wow, your like mean comment / criticism question clearly can get us passionately speaking.
Thank you so much for tuning in.
I wish I could see people's like that was fun for us.
I know,
like
talking to a screen. Yeah, hopefully that's been useful. Hopefully it's given you a bit of an insight into our process.
And hopefully next year this like Aspen thing happens, Idea Festival happens in real life, and we can go and we can like have a margarita after.
Thank you so much and enjoy your evening.
I wanted to do the end of a YouTube video. Thanks so much. Make sure you subscribe.
Like
Hit the
and
link below, and peace.